Hi everyone, it's Aisling here today, and today we're going to be delving into some predictions for the Leaving Cert Home Ec paper 2024. These predictions come straight from a home economics teacher, so they'll really give you that extra edge. Having achieved over 580 points in the Leaving Cert myself, I know how useful it can be to be aware of some topics which might be important for your paper in June. So keep watching to find out what those topics are. Alongside my predictions, I'm also going to be sharing with you lots of tips and helpful resources throughout this video, and all these resources will be linked down in the description below. So make sure to like this video, save yourself the hassle in the future of trying to find all these resources again, because they'll all be saved in one place down in the description. Just a disclaimer before we jump in, predictions can be a great way to figure out which topics you might want to spend a little bit of extra time on or study in a little bit of extra depth, but I would never recommend solely focusing on predictions. The Leaving Cert papers can be unpredictable and are often influenced by a number of factors, so I would always recommend learning the basics of each topic first, and then if you have a little bit of extra time, you can return to the predictions. I'm not the SEC, these are just educated opinions, so really your guess is as good as mine as what will feature on the paper in June. But with that being said, let's jump into the video. So guys, firstly, I'm going to run you through each section on the paper, and as I do, I'll go through important topics for each section. Then we're going to go through some predictions for the 2024 paper, and finally, I'll end with just some general exam tips to do your best in the home economics exam. The first section on the paper is section A, the short question section. This section is worth 60 marks, and you'll be expected to answer 10 out of 14 questions. Expect a mix of questions on food studies, social studies, resource management, and the consumer section. And you want to allocate about 25 minutes to this section. Within this section, they often ask you to define different keywords or key concepts from the different topics. If you're looking for a little bit of help in preparing for these definitions, you should check out the Studyclix flashcards for Leaving Cert Home Ec, which categorize the different definitions from the subtopics all in one place. And they're a great way to practice your key terms. Question 1 is worth 80 marks, and it's a compulsory question. It usually involves analysing an infographic, chart, or table related to nutrition. You can present your analysis in tabular format, but it must include details and analysis from the chart or infographic or table which is provided to you. They might also ask you a question on macro or micronutrients related to the table, and you should allocate about 35 minutes to answering this question. Question 2, 3, 4, and 5 are worth 100 marks total, and you'll need to answer 2 questions from the selection here. Questions 2 and 3 are usually based on food studies. Question 4 is usually based on family resource management or consumer studies, and question 5 is usually based on social studies. You'll want to allocate 40 minutes to this section, spending 20 minutes on each question. If you're struggling with answering the long questions for Leaving Cert Home Ec, don't worry, because Studyclix has you covered. We have sample answers for past paper questions on topics such as the family and the diet, amongst other things, and you can check these out to help get started on tackling those long questions. The last section of the paper is section C, or the section on the elective. Here you'll find 4 elective questions, and you'll be required to answer 1. These questions cover the topics of home design and management, textiles, fashion and design, social studies, and the core elective. All answers are worth 80 marks, except for the textile, fashion and design question, which is worth only 40 because you were required to submit some coursework prior to setting the exam. Within this question, you'll be required to answer part A, and then you'll have a choice between part B and C. Allocate approximately 35 minutes to answering this section. This is the last section on the paper, and with that, now I'm going to run you through some topics which are predicted for the home ec paper. The home ec curriculum is quite large and covers quite a wide range of topics. Therefore, not all topics can be examined each year. So I've comprised a list of topics which haven't appeared on the paper in a while for you to keep an eye on. Although I'd like to think I have a good memory, my memory isn't photographic, so I have a list here with me on the topics which you might expect to see on the paper in June. So first, in the food and nutrition section, we have carbohydrates, which hasn't featured on the paper since 2017, protein, which hasn't featured on the paper since 2020, vitamins A, D, B12, or folate. For minerals, you might expect to see a question on sodium, which hasn't been on the paper in a while. You might expect to see a question on special diets relating to bowel disorders or tooth decay, a question on the Irish diet and the Irish food industry, cereals, dairy, cheese, yogurt, butter and cream, fruits, nuts and pulses, fats and oils, particularly margarine, sauces and raising agents, and then functional foods and GM foods. And then finally, you might expect to see a microbiology question on yeast. Then I've grouped together the questions which you might expect to see on food planning, preparation, preservation and safety. So firstly, you might expect to see a sensory analysis question where you're required to give a descriptive account or an account of the difference between two things. Then for food preservation and cooking, you might be required to give a comparative evaluation. You might see the topics of dry methods, conduction and radiation, which haven't appeared in the paper in a while. You might expect to see a question on food legislation. So, brush up on your notes in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, Safe Food, the Sale of Foods and Drugs Act, and Food Hygiene Law, which would all be very important for a food legislation question. Next, for the family and household finances topics, you might expect to see questions on the components of family resource management, budgeting or insurance, the family as a caring unit, an older family, family members with special needs, particularly due to the referendum which took place not so long ago, family law, the Domestic and Childcare Act, and finally family functions, so social, emotional, financial, etc. Then some kind of miscellaneous topics which you might see questions on, so household technology, a long question on the fridge, particularly WEEE, consumer law, you might want to brush up on the Consumer Protection Act, it's always good to have that in your back pocket. Textiles, the fabric care symbols haven't appeared on the paper in quite a while, so you want to familiarize yourself with all of these topics as they might make a comeback on your paper in June. Next, for some topics which you could potentially rule out or not rely on so heavily, we're going to look at the topics which have featured in the compulsory question 1 in section B over the past couple of years. So last year there was a question on vitamin C and iron. The year before that on the deferred paper there was a question on fats and vitamin D on the main paper. So these are topics which are maybe less likely to resurface on the paper this year, so you might want to not dedicate as much time to these topics. Then, as you hopefully know by now, the Leaving Cert paper can be quite influenced by current affairs. So some predictions based on current news and trends. We can anticipate a question on the cost of living crisis. So you might want to brush up on budgeting, how to budget, particularly with food shopping. Then on that same note, we might expect to see a question on the housing crisis. Be aware of Housing for All, the HAP scheme, how to get a mortgage, and how to save. Energy conservation has been quite topical given the inflation in energy prices in recent times. So you might want to brush up on your notes on how to reduce energy expenditure in the home. Then based on trends, we might expect to see a question on food additives such as artificial sweeteners and consumer responsibility. Particularly in the realm of sustainability, you want to brush up on your notes on reduce, reuse, recycle, how to be more sustainable in the home, food waste, sustainability with food shopping, and so on and so forth. So make sure to keep aware of kind of ongoing events and current affairs to maybe get a little bit of insight on what you might expect to see on your paper in June. Then just some general advice for your exams. Make sure to hand up your answer booklet with your exam booklet, as that contains your answers for the short questions. At the start of every question, you should review the key verbs, so list, describe, explain, to understand what the question is asking of you. Then you should take note of your journal assignments, which topics featured there, because they might be a little bit less likely to feature on the paper as a question again. Then for question 1 in section B, you're required to make an analysis of the data. So remember to look at the data, look at the trends in the data, which is the highest and lowest, and always add why you think it might be this way. Then remember that, Leaving Cert Home Ec will be one of your first exams on day 1, so make sure to use the time between the exams to rest and not stress yourself out too much. Then remember that you have 20% of your Leaving Cert Home Ec grade already secured in the bag by submitting your coursework. So remember not to stress yourself out too much when you're coming into this exam, and try to relax, which I know is definitely easier said than done. Then just some practical exam tips before we end this video. Remember, you must write clearly in blue or black pen. If you make a mistake, don't worry, there's extra paper at the back of your booklet and your examiner will check all pages. Remember to highlight keywords to, always kind of really focus on what the question is asking you. Check the mark allocations for each question. This can help you decide how much time to spend on a question, and also say, for example, if it's 20 marks, you'll probably be required to give 4 or 5 points of information. Spend 5 minutes reading the paper and, circle questions which you may wish to answer. Always do a little skeleton answer, a little rundown, plan your answer out. You're a bit more focused when you actually kind of jump into the question. And then finally, if you're required to draw a diagram, make sure to label your diagrams clearly, as marks are going for all of the labels. Finally, one last tip is to practice the exam questions. Home ec is a subject which the definitions and concepts can't really change. How a tooth decays is always gonna be how a tooth decays, if you know what I mean. So you should definitely practice past exam questions because they're likely to resurface or be recycled. We have a bunch of exam questions available on the website in Studyclix, and all the marking schemes are attached to the exam questions to make studying just that that a little bit easier. And if you've run through all of them, we also have mock questions available on the site, which are a good thing to practice because sometimes they ask the questions in a little bit more of a different way. They challenge you a little bit more, might not be the way you expect the question to be phrased. So yeah, you should definitely check them out if you're looking to practice your exam questions to get prepared for the exams. Once again, remember that these are predictions, they're not facts, so don't rely on them too heavily. Make sure you do all the preparation you need. But with that being said, those are all my tips and tricks and predictions. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more prediction videos because they'll all be coming in the next few weeks. Best of luck with all your preparations.